All right, I will call to order this regular meeting of the Willington School Building Committee. It is Wednesday, May 4th, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. Catherine is not feeling well tonight and not joining us. All right, the next item on the agenda is present to speak. If there is anyone on video or in the room who would like to speak, ask you to raise your hand. Identify yourself for the record. Is there anyone present to speak? You unmute? Can they unmute?
Should be able to.
Mr. Clark? You should be able to unmute yourself.
I did. Matthew Clark, 42 Burlington Road. So I had a couple questions. Has the Board of Education provided the SBC with education specifications yet? It's been many months. If they haven't, I would ask why is that? Why can't we get the education specifications for the SBC to do their job? As far as I can tell, there have been at least 4 executive sessions to evaluate land for building a new school. Maybe there's been more. I don't know. I can't attend all the meetings. On the other hand, as far as I can tell, there's been one meeting devoted to looking at Mr. Toulis's volunteer work for renovating and rebuilding Hall School. How many pieces of I would like to know how many pieces of property that you're evaluating in these executive sessions, and is the SBC close to buying land? All I know is there's a lot of executive sessions. I don't know what's going on there. And in order to get approval from the Board of Finance, the SBC, so you guys said you were going to pursue both a new school and rebuilding Hall School and present both of those to the public. And is that still your plan? I don't know. Is that still what's going to happen? And when will those public presentations happen? And I would say that, going to the state without a plan and just asking just randomly, what do you think about rebuilding our school is a bad idea. Last time that was misinterpreted by the public and misinterpreted by everyone because Mr. I can't remember his name, Italian name or Greek name, I don't remember. He's no longer with the state for dispersing funds for new schools. He indicated the commentary within the school building committee and even in Willington Wire was that the state of Connecticut will not pay to renovate Hall School. And then when we asked him directly at the presentation, will you pay for this? And he said, show me a plan. He did not say no. He said, show me a plan. So I'm interested to find out why we would go and ask them again the same question. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else present to speak? Yes, I see a hand up. Arthur, you should be able to unmute yourself. Identify yourself for the record.
Arthur Christensen, 14 Birch Meadow Lane. I want to address some comments that were made on the Communications Subcommittee meeting 4/28/2022. This was a comment made by Mr. Toulis. They, referring to the townspeople, complain a lot, but are hesitant to say anything at any time. This happens about 14 minutes in. Phil responds with, they are quiet until, and then Mr. Toulis interrupts and says, until it's too late to change the inertia. And closing out these comments, Mr. Toulis says, quote, anything we can do to draw them out, because otherwise they will just complain later, end quote. This happens about 14 minutes to about 15:15 into the meeting. There is a very big reason for that. And the reason that people don't come out and people don't express their opinions is what we're doing now, present to speak. Mr. Clark before me raised some very good issues and some very good questions, but no one can address them. No one can say anything because we talk at you and then the committee or the board, whoever, talks back at us. How is that going to foster any interaction with your townspeople? And if you want me to complain, I'm happy to complain because this process is taking forever. This committee was formed in January of 2021, and you have taken baby steps to do anything regarding a school. The latest SIP plan that we got at the town meeting has 29 existing school projects that should be funded with only 3 that are currently funded because they're urgent. And the reason the others are not funded is because we don't know what we're going to do with the school situation. Meanwhile, our kids and faculty are sitting in terrible conditions. We had a pipe burst during the Easter egg hunt. There is asbestos remediation going on while the kids are hunting for Easter eggs at their playground. Should our kids and faculty be sitting in this kind of stuff, all while the school building committee takes small steps to figure out what they're going to do, whether we're going to build a new school, we're going to renovate the schools, what we're going to do? All I heard in October of last year was how the school building committee needed their $100,000 released before they could do any work. Well, it was released in October and nothing got done until February when you hired Colliers. And since then, very little else has been done. So the reason no one comes forward and the reason no one complains and the reason no one is on these meetings to express their opinions is because it doesn't get you anywhere. Because like I said, when I'm done talking, which I will be in 5 seconds, Erica is going to say, thank you, anyone else present to speak, and that's going to be the end of it. So what motivation does anybody in the town have to bring up these issues? Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, you should be able to unmute yourself. State your name for the record, please.
Michelle Christensen, Birch Meadow Lane. I just wanted to echo Arthur's comments. With the exception for maybe 2 or 3 people, the committee comes across as not wanting community input. It's the political front of present to speak and it ends there. I think it's unfair to say that people just complain when it's too late. Some of us that do show up and speak despite being ignored. There is community input around town. I just feel it falls on deaf ears. I've written to this board in the past, most recently to let it be known of a Zoom link issue and a few other comments. I was not met with even an acknowledgement that my email was received. I have been present to speak a couple of times at this committee's meetings, and it has led to things being misunderstood and being taken out of context. This committee is very important to the town of Willington. Sitting on the sidelines, watching as the community member, the politics, arguing, and what I see as a mismanagement of time and money has led to delays in getting the project moving. To be very clear, so my words are not twisted, I am well aware that this is not an overnight process. It's not easy, and there's a lot of details. In the meantime, our children are the ones that have the biggest fallout of these delays. They, along with faculty, are the ones sitting in the current building conditions that I would go as far as to say are hazardous to anyone's health, especially our young developing children. The fact that this issue has gone on more years than I'm even aware of is discouraging. Based on actions of committee members, not much from the public is taken into consideration, and when asking for the community input, it's just hypocritical. Sadly, the only time a voice matters is at the ballot box. I, for one, want nothing more than to see a final resolution and a plan for our kids' sake. This town has neglected our children for far too long. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else present to speak? There will be another opportunity at the end of the meeting. I will just take the opportunity to say your comments during present to speak are heard. It is unfortunately not a place where we conduct business. That is why you don't get a response during present to speak. If there are items on the agenda, they are addressed. I will leave any further comments to your words to our chair once she returns, and allow her to speak to those. As far as executive session goes, which was alluded in previous comments, what is discussed in executive session is, unless there is action taken in open session, is not something that is discussed. It is in executive session. And so I will not comment, more than likely will not get a comment on what took place in those executive sessions. But it should not be assumed what is being discussed. The reason for executive session is listed, but what is being discussed is not something that the public is privy to. Moving along, chairperson's report. So did Catherine send anything along?
Yeah, she just reminded the committee members, if you have any vacations planned for the summer, she's trying to figure out where we'll have meetings, if we're going to have problems with the quorum this summer. So please make sure you let her know that. And then there was a question about, we already know, and we talked about this last meeting, that we're missing a couple members on the next regularly scheduled meeting, which is May 18th. And I think when we get to the agenda item number 9, future business items for future agenda, we need to determine if number 1, if we need a meeting on May 18th, and number 2, if we would have a quorum if we had a meeting. So those were her 2 items.
So if you can share your future plans with Catherine so that we can assess summer planning. All right, item 4, approval of meeting minutes. The first item are the meeting minutes from the Land Assessment Committee meeting March 14, 2022. But entertain a motion. Don't all speak at once.
Did we get those?
I believe they were sent. I apologize. I often see them, so I may not pay attention the same way you do.
Justin, which ones are you asking about, Justin?
The land assessment. I didn't see those through the email.
You know what? That was the one that was tabled last month, and we left it on the agenda. I don't know if it came through either.
Ralph, you should be able to unmute yourself.
I had got an email from Mike. He was looking for input on the minutes. He had something sketchy. I don't think they were finalized, so we don't have them yet.
Hold those off. All right. SBC, item B, SBC meeting minutes from our last regular meeting on April 20th, 2022. We should have all received those. Anne?
I move that we approve the minutes of the SBC meeting dated April 20th, 2022.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Justin. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any abstentions?
Sorry, I was muted. Aye.
Any abstentions? Any opposed? Yes. Moving forward to communications. There are no communications. So Phil and I will state there's no communications that Catherine passed along to us. All right, subcommittee reports. Communications committee.
Communications committee met, but you'll see our work later on in the agenda. That we addressed the frequently asked questions document. There were 3 new questions, so I'm sure we'll talk about it then.
Land assessments. I know Mike's not here and Catherine's not here. Ralph, have you had a meeting since our last meeting?
I believe we had. I believe we had one. Ralph can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe we had one meeting. The only item on the agenda was executive session, so that's the end of that report.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that consisted primarily of a site walk. And I'll leave it at that.
Finance subcommittee, Peter?
We met this evening. Prior to this meeting, we discussed per pupil costs, we discussed capital projects, and those discussions will continue in our next meeting.
Thank you. Brings us to item 7, old business. Item A is owner's project manager update. Scott is with us. So Scott, I will give you the floor.
Sure, thank you, Erica. Scott Pellman from Colliers. Yeah, what I'd like to do is just provide an update, maybe circle back a little bit. Maybe it answers a few of the questions. To date, we've looked at 129 different sites, have walked a number of them with the site committee as well. A good majority of those sites are privately owned. So again, that is why those discussions have been done under executive session, because we don't want to do anything that would jeopardize any future negotiations. We have identified one site in particular that I have further developed some very high-level concept sketches, and we're going to be having some discussions with those individuals that are the property owners very shortly to see if they are are eager to potentially pursue a project on this parcel of land, which would also allow us to start digging in a little bit deeper, doing some of the background reviews of that piece of land. If the committee recalls, we have produced a high-level concept sketch of how renovations would work on the existing site, showing both an addition to the Hall Memorial School, relocation of ball fields. We discussed potential regrading of the fields down towards the stream, a new separate bus loop, which would incorporate a new curb cut. So we have already on a very high level looked at what additions would be required. Hall School is not large enough to accommodate the center school population. So it would require an addition. And we've also taken a look at how potentially the classrooms that the Board of Education is developing their room requirements, how those room requirements, as we understand them to date, would fit into the existing building. So we are working on that. All of this is critical. So again, we can have that conversation. You know, as most people are aware, Costa Diamantis is no longer with school facilities. I think any of the comments that he's made in the past would not hold much water with the public. So we want to reach back out to the current individuals in charge of that school construction program. We want to come to them both with our high-level concept of what a renovation of Hall Memorial School would be. We also wanted to let them know, and I think at this point, and based after our discussions this week with a landowner, I think we have a couple of options for new sites that we can also explore with them. Once that's completed, we have started some very high-level concept estimates. Again, a little premature to release any numbers at this point, but we need to understand what the state's participation is going to be in either a renovation or a new project. With or without the state's support, we are going to present or planning on presenting a renovation project and what those costs would be, and you know, eventually leave that up to the taxpayer to make that decision. And there will be you know, a number of public information sessions. We just really need to know our baseline. We've taken a look at the state space standards in regards to school population, how that aligns with the current ed spec that is under development with the Board of Education, as well as how that aligns with the current square footage of the existing Hall and Center schools. So I think, you know, Phil has reached out to Office of School Construction Grants and Review. He is working hard to get a meeting set up with them. Again, we're looking forward to our meeting tomorrow evening with one of the landowners to try and move that forward. And, you know, hopefully once we have our meeting with the state and a little bit further understanding of what support they will be, we're certainly going to be looking to schedule our first public information session just to put out what information we've gathered to date, and then certainly listen carefully to a lot of the questions and comments from the community.
Thank you, Scott. So I think what I heard you say, and this would go back to some of the comments we heard in public to speak, is that we are in fact looking at two avenues: a renovation of Hall School, which this committee determined was the best option to renovate Hall School, as well as the renovation option, and then a new school and a new site. And so we are still investigating the two projects, and we plan to take both of those to the state to identify support from the state on those projects. Correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And you know, and until the ed spec is a little bit further developed and approved by the board, again, we're a little reluctant. You know, we're going on preliminary information to lay out those spaces. We are looking at an apples to apples comparison at the moment. But again, we're waiting for the Board of Education and Phil to get us a little bit closer on a final ed spec so that we can then refine those concepts and then be prepared to you know, show those concepts to the public.
And I know the ed specs are on the Board of Education. Scott, that's something you might work in conjunction with Phil on. So can I ask, I know there's question about where we are with the ed specs. I know the Board of Education began working on them Can you just give us an update and about what a typical timeline is? I think it's important that we move this process forward, but that we don't rush the process, that we do it right, so we have all the information that we need.
Yep, Board of Ed was supposed to meet last night. The meeting had to be canceled. We had a member who had a death in the family, and we already had another member that was absent. And so it's important for feedback from the board. So that meeting will be rescheduled. We're still working on them internally without the board, obviously, with staff. We've gotten feedback from staff members regarding programs that are written into the ed specs that went out through Google survey. So their input is being inserted into the document. So it's in the works. The other thing, Scott, can you I want to make sure, there was a question about land purchase, and I think this is important for people to understand. If the route the committee chooses to go is a new school on a new site, can you just explain when that land would be purchased? Because I think that's important for people to understand.
Yeah, what we would look to do is to formulate an agreement with the landowner that pending a successful referendum, if there was a successful referendum, we would have a negotiated cost, work with the building committee in the town to negotiate an agreed upon cost for the land. That would be included in the town meeting / referendum approval process. And with a successful passage of overall project funding, then the land would be purchased. What we're also looking to do, if there is, hopefully continued interest, we do need to do some background homework on the land. We want to do a phase 1 environmental study. We've already looked at utility availability and adjacency to a number of privately owned parcels to understand what it would cost to get the proper utilities to the site. We may do some initial borings to do a check for a septic field. But again, we're not quite at that point yet. We need to really get an understanding and a buy-in from a private landowner to be able to allow us onto the land to do that additional exploration.
Thanks. So I think it's important for the committee to once again hear, and for the public who's on this meeting and will either read our minutes or follow this video, that while it seems as though it's taken a long time, we have evaluated 129 parcels to identify that may mean new parcel for new school, new site, or renovation. And so there is lots of work being done, and it may seem frustrating, but these things, I find myself repeating myself, don't happen overnight. So we want to make sure we have we've done our due diligence. So work is being done on this matter. Right. Anything from the committee? Comments, questions on Scott's update? Peter, you have to unmute yourself. I apologize, I muted folks because of background noise.
That's okay. Thank you, Erica. Scott, I'm trying to get a sense of the timetable here. I understand we're waiting for the ed specs. We heard that earlier this evening in our finance subcommittee meeting as well. When will that be available to our larger committee here? And then when will we see how that's applied to both project possibilities, renovation or new, so that we see what you would be taking to this meeting with the state?
Peter, I can't, unfortunately, I can't comment on completion of the ed spec. That's outside of my control. But what we will be taking to the state is a concept plan that takes the individual identified spaces, classrooms, office area, nurse, those types of program areas, plugging those into the existing school to show the state that in fact we can accommodate the program in the existing school with an addition, and what some of those positives and negatives of that may be. A concept sketch for a new school will be solely based on overall ed spec square footage and based on the space standards and those discussions with the state. So it would just be really at this point, the concept of stating that the land that we have located is sufficient and adequate to build a new school. And then we would continue on with the approval of that parcel of land is incorporating the state review and acceptance of the land as well.
Maybe I didn't ask my question well. Let me rephrase it. Will we see both plans before you go to the state with what you're presenting? Will we be able to fully understand what you're presenting to the state?
Yes.
Prior to that meeting.
Yes, I would say we can absolutely do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else?
Well, let me preface that. I will say if we're still not to a point where we're negotiating with a landowner and we're not at a point where they're comfortable putting it out in the public, and we feel that putting it out in the public would jeopardize those negotiations, then again, we would talk about an ed spec or a building area only, but not on a specific site. We're not necessarily going to get specific with the state. We're just going to say we have located, we have 2 privately owned parcels that we've identified that both could accommodate a new school. So we feel comfortable that one or the other hopefully will pan out.
Any other comments, Gary?
I just want to clarify one thing there. I think Peter might have been asking, is the building committee going to be knowledgeable about what these potential sites are? I believe the answer to that would be yes. We have the ability to do that in executive session. Isn't that correct? Okay, so.
Correct, yes.
All right, thank you.
And I believe from the executive session the last time we met, I believe that the building committee is aware of the parcels that we are targeting.
Anne?
I have a question about the approval of the parcel or parcels of land. Do we have, must the referendum have approved? Will we have to make the decision whether we're going to build a new school or renovate and have it go to the state to make that decision before we start approving the parcel of land or going through those processes?
No, in order to bring a grant application forward to the state and in order to have something for the community to vote on, you will have a parcel identified because costs are going to differ. We're going to need to do our project budget based on the land that you would be appropriating. Mm-hmm. So the land will be known, and you're not going to go necessarily with 2 projects to referendum. Typically, I think through public input in this committee, I think you're going to choose, do we go to referendum or town meeting with a renovation project or a new project? And again, we're going to present financial data, overall costs, schedule timeline of anticipated construction timeline, some of the other, what the impacts would be to the average mill rate of the different levels of housing within the community. So there will be a lot of information provided to the community so they can make an educated decision. But typically you're just going to have one referendum question, because if you split the referendum and said, do we want to build new or do we want to build reno, you're going to get half and half are going to vote for either way, and you're not going to get a consensus.
Okay, and then at that point, once the, say we do build the new school, we do agree to build the new school, then all that work on the parcel would occur after the referendum, Yeah,
what we've done, I think, in the past I had presented I don't have it available tonight, but I can certainly present it again at our next meeting. What you would do is once you pass referendum, we're targeting right now a grant application to the state, which would need to be submitted prior to June 30th of 2023. After that, you get put on what's called the priority list. The priority list would go into the state of Connecticut, into the legislative body, be submitted in December of 2023. and the legislative body would take up approval of your project funding by July, no later than typically July 1st of 2024. With the passage of a successful referendum in project funding, and again, what our initial meeting with the state is, and we will have a number of meetings with the state, is we want to bring them into the process. We want to make sure that they understand the process, what we're trying to achieve. So when it comes to filing the grant application, they're 100% on board. They understand what we're doing, and we make this process very, very simple and very easy. What we would recommend in this then is as soon as the district has approved the funding for the project, we would look to hire an architect, hire a construction manager for pre-construction estimating, reviews, get the project designed. So as soon as the following July 1st, 2024, you have a project that's been fully vetted, both by town officials, construction manager, Colliers, hopefully, and the state of Connecticut, ready to go to bid, ready to award. So as soon as that state funding is approved, now you can start paying the bills with the state money, and then you pull the trigger and start construction. So right now, the anticipated timeline to start of construction would be summer of 24.
Yeah. Ralph?
Scott, question for you. Regardless of which direction we go, be it a reconfiguration of hall or a new school on a new site, we are still required to do two things. We're going to have to do a phase 1 environmental, and we're also going to have to get past the CGS 8-24 review by the Planning Commission. At what point in the process do those things happen?
Well, again, as far as the new parcel we're looking at, we're hoping to get permission from the landowners to, and again, a phase 1, for people that don't know, it's really more a historical research done by an environmental engineering firm. They look to see what the property's been used for, let's say, the past 100 years. Have there been any discharges of any environmental concerns adjacent to or potentially on the property? They do a full evaluation study of the property. If there is any levels of concern, then they would recommend a phase 2. So the state requires that, if they're going to become parcel, if they're going to be a partner with you on a new building project, there's requirements in exactly what Ralph noted. A phase 1 is required. We can't go onto a private parcel of land without permission, or would even want to do a phase 1 without permission from the landowners, because God forbid that phase 1 shows something is discovered. In the parcels that we're looking at, I think the confidence is that it's pretty high, that they're very clean, virgin sites. So I don't anticipate anything, but it is part of the process. And then, yes, we would have to go to the planning and zoning. Again, this would happen before a project was brought forth for either town meeting or referendum for an 824, which is the zoning, planning and zoning's approval that the project makes sense, in essence, for the overall location, configuration, and direction that the town is going. So you would absolutely do an 824 referral as well prior to setting a referendum in a project for referendum.
My reason for asking, particularly with the 824, is the Planning Commission can give it a thumbs down. And if they do, then the town would be forced to go to town meeting to get that site approved and override the Planning and Zoning Commission. All of these things take time. And I just want to make sure that everyone understands that there's lead times to getting all these things accomplished.
Thank you, Ralph. Anyone else? Justin?
I just had a question. I know the date was kind of far out to try to meet with the state. I just didn't know if you guys had gotten any response back yet, if there was any chance of moving that sooner or not.
No, still no, they did not respond to the second email, and they have not responded to a phone call yet. So I'm going to try and call one more time. We'll see what happens. Still Thank July you. At this point.
Yes, Peter. You're muted, Peter.
Thank you, Erica. Scott, while we're waiting for that state meeting, can we look at both concept plans? Is that basically what we've seen to date, or is there still more to be done on them?
He's muted.
Scott, you're muted.
Sorry, I was on mute that time. Sorry, Peter. There was some minor revisions to the plan that this committee saw at the last meeting, just to define a little bit better circulation around a proposed building. Again, high level concept, just to demonstrate where the curb cut might be or where you might enter the facility, which is something we discussed at our meeting. We just didn't have it graphically represented. And then again, you've seen the concept right now as we understand it for the hall renovation from a site plan standpoint. And that hasn't changed.
All right, any other comments or questions on owner's project manager update? Scott, thank you. All right, I'll move on to item B, potential executive session. It's my understanding that we do not need an executive session at this meeting. Is that correct? Yes, Justin.
I had just mentioned something to Mike earlier last week. I just didn't know if that had made it through to the land committee or not.
I'm not on the land committee, so I don't know. Gary or Ralph, do you know if any communication from Justin made it to the committee?
I'm not aware of any.
Me neither.
So I don't know if it's worth having.
Supposed to be executive. I mean, we could go into an executive session if there's a need for it. However brief, I
can follow up with Scott and the rest of the land committee.
Okay, thank you. All right, so seeing no action needed, we'll move on to item C, update from the Hall Foundation. So I understand that Mike and Catherine met as planned with Alice Castles from the Hall Foundation, and we had submitted some questions. I believe most of them were questions that Peter had proposed to the Hall Foundation. Phil, do you have those responses?
Yep, so these are the questions. Sorry, it's bigger for you.
See, the old eyes in the room are a little far from the screen. Yeah.
So these are the questions that were submitted that when Mike and Catherine met. What's the Hall Foundation's present understanding? It is basically to build a new school. Have there been any communications regarding the use of Hall School with school administration, past or present? No, other than a phone call received, and that was from me in 2016. I think that was me. Does the Hall Foundation support other town functions in addition to the school system? Yes, they support some other things, social services, school nurses, school financial aid assistance. They do some scholarships, things like that. They provide glasses in school, things like that. Would the Hall Foundation support any potential plan by SBC to continue to use Hall School as a school or related educational activity? Yes, it would. Would the Hall Foundation support non-educational town use of Hall School? Yes, provided it is used to serve the people of the town. Number 6, would the Hall Foundation work with Willington to modify the current deed to allow flexibility in the use of Hall School by the town for either educational or non-educational purposes? Yes, they would. Would the Hall Foundation support the use of Hall School for non-Willington educational purposes? Again, yes, provided it's used to serve the people of the town. Would they support the demolition of the non-1922 school additions and reconfiguration with modern additions to create a new K-8 campus? Yes, only for the non-1922 section. However, refer to the letter dated 4/15/14 regarding the historic district of South Willington. Number 9 was, what is the expectation of the Hall Foundation if the schools return to the foundation by the town? And they said they don't expect that. However, if it does happen, we would need to go to discuss it. And they noted that it was used as a community building a long time ago. Number 10, would the foundation support the sale of Hall School with proceeds to be directed to the construction of a new K-8 school? And they said no, the Hall Foundation would like to share in the proceeds of the sale to give back to the community. So those were their, oh, sorry, number 11, this is the last one. Number 11 was, what is the availability of foundation representatives to meet? And it was really, it was already answered that they already met. So those were their responses from that meeting.
Thank you, Phil. Now we can see the whole committee again. Any comments regarding those responses? So I think what I heard is they, you know, they certainly supported potentially altering the deed. As you know, as it stands, it belongs to the town so long as it's being used as a school, and that they would support some other uses so long as they serve the town. I think the question regarding the sale of, they would not support that. If they own the building and the deed does not change, then any sale and any proceeds go to the foundation, and the town wouldn't have a say in that. If the deed was altered and belonged to the town, I think there's certainly be room for discussion about that. So any comments or questions from the commission? I want to appreciate Mrs. Castle sitting down with Catherine and Mike to give us some input from their perspective. Peter? You look like you're wavering. Yes, no?
Yeah. Am I muted? No, I'm not muted.
Oh.
I'm just looking at the responses, and now I can't see them anymore. But if I understood it correctly, they would support demolishing the additions, but made some reference to the South Willington Village for the original 1922 central portion of the facilities. Am I correct on that? And what is that South Willington Village? Is that meaning it's a historic district, or what is the actual?
I don't believe so. I believe it. I'd have to pull the letter out, Peter. I'm not as familiar with it. I know I have seen it and see what that letter says. That is not, it wasn't given the same historic district designation that the green area does, but there was some discussion about it being historic. So I think it's a historic area without the benefits of a specific historic district, but we can get the letter and take a look at it and see what that refers to.
Peter, I think the historic portion is the 1922 section too. So I think their point is that they would support the demolition of anything at Hall School except that portion. And I think that's why they're referencing that section. But either way, it doesn't matter whether that letter exists or not. They're basically saying they wouldn't support demolishing that 1922 section.
And I think that goes along with what we've said as a committee. I know I said specifically when Catherine and Phil and I met with the then head of OSCGR, and he asked that very specific question: would there be support for demolishing this building? And I unequivocally said no. And so I think that goes along with exactly what we've heard from the Hall Foundation, and we've heard that from our community.
And I can email all these responses to the committee if you want to see them in writing.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Well, I just want to follow up on my own, if I may, Erica. I would like to see us follow up on this issue, because it occurs to me, at least, that it may be advantageous to demolish the entire facility if we go in that direction, particularly with some of the cautionary advisories we've gotten from Scott on renovating the existing structure. So I understand that they may have some attachment to the 1922 structure as a foundation, but is that off the table for us, so to speak, in the event that we find a clean slate on that site is a better approach for us? So I would like to follow up and find that out.
Right, so I think there's two things. While it belongs, the deed right now, the building belongs to the town. So we certainly can, I would think, do what we will with it. I would hesitate to say we would demolish it. I'm not sure I would support that. But Peter, are you saying you'd like Scott, to take a look at a new school on that site with no portion of Hall School in place compared to what we're doing now?
Well, I don't think it should be off the table, particularly given our desire for a flat site.
Well, I mean, we are regrading part of the site, closer to the river. The real key issue here, though, is you've got no place to put 210 kids. So you're going to have to find, and you're not going to put enough portables in a temporary gymnasium and dining area and everything. Probably by the time you abate, demolish, and build a new school, you're probably looking at about 3 years. The state doesn't pay for temporary facilities. You'd have to find a separate parcel to, in essence, create a temporary school to move all the kids to, so you could demolish the existing building and then create a new one. There just wouldn't be enough room on that site to do all of that at the same time. So I think, if you had swing space available, and if the Hall Foundation was, and Historic District was amenable to potentially demolishing the building, that then could be a viable concept. But I think at this point, not having a place to put those children, I think, right now what we're anticipating is you would build an addition, transfer out a portion of the of the current students into that addition, freeing up some space, and then do a systematic renovation of the existing building. You have to create swing space, and then you can renovate specific small areas of it. But you can't do the whole thing in one shot because you've got no place to put the kids.
You're
muted, Peter.
You're muted.
We could not use center school as swing space supplemented with some portable classrooms?
You're talking about doubling the size of the school, more than doubling it, with specialties, science labs, everything else. I don't think that site could support the parking, the parent arrivals, drop off, and that number of portable classrooms. I think it's an 8-acre site. So my quick opinion on that would be no. That would just be too difficult. There is not sufficient land there to put the number of portable classrooms required to maintain a middle school facility.
And I may be wrong in this amount, but I recall somewhere in the $10 million range was the portable city that went up behind Birch Grove when they built their new school. So a significant cost, certainly more students, because we'd be talking about half of our students. But they had about 100 acres of land on that parcel. So they had land, but that was a significant cost to us. And to hear Scott say that the swing space is not reimbursable by the state is concerning to me. And
as soon as we tear down the building, isn't it then a new building? We're no longer renovating?
Correct.
yes,
If you tear the whole
if
thing.
you tear the whole thing down, you're building a whole new building.
Correct.
So we're talking about new school, same site, as opposed to new school, new site.
Yeah, and those are the things that we once we get to that point with the building committee, looking at overall timeline, constructability, schedule, soft costs, general conditions of the contractors. It's certainly easier and quicker to build a new school than renovating a school. It's a matter of, can you do it? 1, 2, what is the most fiscally responsible solution? And or 3, also what is educationally the best solution? And you need to take all those factors into account. You may have a solution that's much cheaper that doesn't work well educationally. You may have a solution that is more expensive. So again, it's not just a matter of, you're not going to evaluate it, or we wouldn't recommend that you evaluate it solely based on cost. It's impact to the students as well. When you renovate schools, and we do a lot of it, of renovating occupied schools, but you're talking about 2-3 years of a lot of disruption to the staff and to the students and to the educational process. Living through a renovation is not an easy thing. It can be done, and we do it a lot. Again, if we can create the appropriate swing space to do it safely without compromising the educational process.
Thank you, Scott. Any other members of the committee? Questions in reference to the Hall Foundation response? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Once again, I want to thank Mrs. Castles for coming forward and meeting with us. Update on frequently asked questions document. I'll leave that to Mr. Stevens from the Communications Subcommittee.
Yep, so you had 3 questions that you wanted us to answer that you talked about last time. These were basically the questions that came out of what was in the Willington Wire update. And so you had said, let's form questions around it. Why did the committee hire an owner's project manager? How will they support the process? And basically what's in here is what's in the Willington Wire. What was the result of the student enrollment study that was presented in January 22? And again, that was from the Willington Wire as well. There was minor modifications, and there's links to the study and his presentation. And then what are educational specifications, who creates them and how are they utilized? And then there was same type of thing that was there. So I'm not sure if you want me to send this off to you. Do you want a second to read them? How would you like to? Your communications plan basically says that Ann and I, as the subcommittee, write our responses. They go through Catherine. Catherine's approved these, and they go off to be published. They would just go on to the we would send it, create an updated link for this new document with these new answers. And I know Scott has a list of questions that he's posed as well, but I think they're further down the line when we have more information.
Can you scroll up to the 3rd question? Have a second to look at that one. I have full confidence in our subcommittee answering the questions. Again, mainly taking most of the text from that we've already used. I'm glad to see the links there, and Catherine has approved them. I am comfortable with them moving forward and being updated. And to the rest of the committee, I will just say, right, when you're done reading, give us a heads up, as I can only see a couple of you at a time. It's the quietest we are.
Scroll feedback. What would you like?
Can we scroll down?
Those are previous questions that are already on our FAQ. Those were not updated, just the 3 questions at the top.
Right. These are the 3 that are new.
All right, so I will say, is there anyone opposed to updating the FAQ following our communications plan procedures? All right, hearing no responses.
I can share that link too once it's posted, so you have that.
But question?
Yes, Peter. You muted yourself.
I was trying to unmute. Are we approving this tonight?
Your process is not to approve.
Right. Our process is that the subcommittee generate the responses, and that they are approved by our chair and then shared with the committee. our process. So I would say unless there was some feedback, we would move forward with updating the site.
So this is approved by a subcommittee, not by the larger committee.
It's approved by our chair. Peter, is there feedback on any of the questions you have concern about?
I'm having trouble seeing them. That's my problem. I can't see the third one.
Back down.
That's better, thank you. Could we make a final change? Can we make changes to this?
What is your feedback, Peter?
My feedback is the last sentence where it states that the educational specifications will be used as the driving force behind developing a preschool through 8 building concept. I would like something. I understand that we get this input from the Board of Education and the ed specs that we'll eventually receive, but the final building concept will be approved by our committee, correct?
That is correct, but the educational specs are what drive that building concept. I think that is a factual statement. We are using educational specs to conceptualize a new building.
I understand. I'm just also wanting everyone to understand that this is a town school building committee and not a Board of Ed committee, and that the final decision on the final concept will be by this committee, certainly taking into consideration whatever is presented in the ed specs.
I'm going to defer. Scott, could you respond to that? Are you still there?
Yeah, I apologize. Can you repeat the question, please? I had to step away for a moment.
Peter's asking who has, in the last line of the response, it says the educational specifications will be used as the driving force behind developing a preschool through grade 8 building concept. He's asking who has the final say in the building concept. Is it the Board of Education or is it the school building committee?
The Board of Education approves the ed spec. And that's kind of the Bible. That's them saying, this is what we need. Then they're going to hand that to the building committee. The building committee is charged in building a building that represents the requirements of the ed spec. So from a budget standpoint, materials, design conditions, it's really then, once the ed spec is approved, it's really the onus of the building committee to develop a building that meets the requirements of the ed spec. But does that answer your question?
So the line in the question is the educational specifications will be used as the driving force behind developing a preschool through grade 8 building concept. That is the correct statement of what the ed specs are used for. They are the driving force. We use that, I just heard you say, as kind of a Bible. Is that correct?
Yes, the ed spec will get filed with the grant application. So the state of Connecticut, you know, if the ed spec says we need 4 pre-K classrooms that are 1,000 square feet, and all of a sudden, you know, you're not going to just build 2, and the state's going to come out and say, wait a minute, we approved an ed spec in a budget for 4 pre-K classrooms. You only built 2. You didn't follow your ed spec, and you're going to get into issues. So again, it's important that the ed spec's developed, you know, that in well conceived, and really meets the, you know, the short and long-term goals of the community from an educational standpoint. But then the building committee needs to follow that as far as the required spaces, what those spaces need from a fit out standpoint, as far as, you know, specialty use areas, science labs, other things. Does the art room need a kiln room, for example? Most likely, yes. Those types of things. But it's not going back to the Board of Education to make decisions on budget. That's all, you know, or overall design, selection of the architect, approval of the plans, the final approval of the drawings and specifications to take them to the state is actually a joint approval by both the building committee and the Board of Ed, but it's really the building committee's charge to take the Board of Ed specs and turn that into a building.
Can we have that reflected in this paragraph? That what Scott just said in his last sentence?
The question that's being answered, I'll direct you to, is what are the ed specs? Who creates them and how are they utilized? And in my opinion, Phil and Catherine, Phil and Ann have answered that. What are they? And the Board of Ed creates them and how are they utilized? They are utilized to develop a preschool through 8. It doesn't say that, nothing says that the Board of Ed does. This isn't about who moves forward. It's about what the ed specs are.
I understand the explanation. What I'm asking is, can we make it clearer in this communication to the townspeople that, as Scott just stated, the final implementation of the ed specs, the final building concept that's approved will be by this committee? Because that seems ambiguous to me here in this paragraph.
Can you say your statement that you want in there again, Peter?
That the final building concept will be approved by the town school building committee, which is what I think Scott just said.
Yeah, if I may, maybe just suggest, say the educational specifications are developed and approved by the Board of Education and provided to the Public Building Committee, who uses those education specifications to develop the final building.
Develop what I would think approve.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah, like I said, before you go to the final review meeting for the state, the board will also, and typically we do it in a joint meeting, they'll have to certify and go back and say that the project that the building committee has developed meets the educational specifications and overall budget that was also approved by the town. So it's kind of a joint approval, but they really don't have much input once they approve the ed spec to the final product. Again, then it's just them circling back and saying, yes, the project that the building committee has developed meets our ed spec.
I'll ask the committee as a whole again. Are we comfortable with the questions as they were answered and updating our FAQ document? See a nod from Gary. Peter, not with the last question. Is there anyone else not comfortable with the questions as they were presented?
Peter, can I make a suggestion? I don't think the question that's asked there, I don't think is where your response belongs. What I do think is that we could add another question that gets to how does that process work? Because what Scott Pellman's talking about is the process of, so the Board of Ed approves the ed spec,
Then one.
right? And then what? And so I think that's where your question is more. So we could create a question that says basically that. So the Board of Ed approves an ed spec and it goes to the school building committee. What happens then? Because what I don't want to, I hear you, Scott, saying what you're saying, but let's face it, no Board of Education is going to approve and sign off on a building plan that doesn't meet their ed specs. So, and I think that's what Scott's point is. And so you wouldn't have, when I say the school building committee has the final say, and Scott's point was, you're doing that collaboratively, because the school building committee, you could say, no, we want to change this. Well, if the Board of Ed doesn't sign off on it, the Board of Ed is the one that submits the grant application, folks. So It's got to be a joint thing. So I think, Scott, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is where you would see adjustments to ed specs, and that might also be part two of this question. Something that we should add is that, you know, when you see ed specs, and you see this when you look at Mansfield's, there's 5 published dates, I think, something like that. And the reason for that is, hey, they said we wanted this first and realized that's out of our ballpark, or we made some adjustments, we want something different, and they published a new set. So the final ed spec, Scott, that they published in Mansfield, I'm assuming, is the one that is the final document that they're submitting to the state, and that is the one that they're signing off on, saying your school, the school building committee has met our ed spec requirement.
Well, the ed spec is filed. You're correct. The ed spec is filed with the grant application, and I apologize. I may have confused things a little bit. So the Board of Ed develops the ed spec. You know, and again, this building committee will be reviewing them, and we'll start looking at it as far as cost. The state, you know, if the Board of Ed, let's just say, put together an ed spec for a 200,000 square foot building with a 500 seat auditorium, the state of Connecticut is going to say, no, you know, no way, don't even bother submitting that, because we're not going to let a project go that big. So, you know, we got to make sure it's right size. The building committee is going to be part of that. But the final ed spec, yes, is voted on after typically some revisions, approved by the Board of Ed. Then it's handed to the building committee after the grant application is filed. You file a grant application, hand it to the building committee, and then the building committee starts developing the building. And then right before the project is going to go out to bid, there's a form called the SCGO 42. And that at the end of all the design, the estimating, project's ready to go to the state needs to approve it before it's bid. Both the building committee and the Board of Ed approve this document stating that the project that's being put forth to the state meets both the budget and the ed spec. And so it's something that's voted on by both at that time, that form, and it's got to be signed off by the Board of Ed chair and the building committee chair and the superintendent. And without that signed document, you're not bringing your drawings to the state, and the state's not giving you the letter to say you can go out to bid.
So I think that what I just heard you say is I agree, Peter, that's missing from that answer, but I'd like to see this as a separate question. So I think if we could create a separate question that says, what happens once the school building committee has the approved educational specifications from the Board of Education, then we could put Scott's, basically your response that you just stated, and we could put that question right below it. Does that meet your feedback?
I think that'll be a step in the right direction, yes.
All right, so the communications committee will work on a question, and we'll move forward with the 3 questions as presented. Thank you all. Move on to item E, update on hybrid meetings. So that's me. The state did pass a bill late last week, allowing us to continue meetings in the manner we've been using throughout COVID. So we have 3 options, fully in person, fully remote, or a hybrid. Today we're using the hybrid. At our last meeting, this committee indicated that we would all be in favor of hybrid if we could. So there is no sunset date. The April 30th, 2022 sunset date was removed. No new date was put in place. So until such time as this committee takes different action, we will continue to have meetings hybrid. So you can come here in person or attend via Zoom. And that the same goes for the public. Any comments, questions? All right. Potential item F, potential use of center and hall schools. Gary, did you have an update for us? I think we had asked if you knew any developers, if you had any.
I did have one conversation with the developer that was looking for projects in Connecticut, and I did bring up the address with them and showed them the site on Google. It's a developer from out of state, so I'm not sure that they'd be able to come to Connecticut unless they're very interested. But they did mention that, that they, just looking at the building, they felt like it did have a potential for housing. So whatever type of housing that might be, elderly housing, senior housing, regular multifamily housing. That's something that I wasn't surprised about. But that's just some sort of informal, just an informal take from somebody that saw it for the first time. I'll continue to kind of beat the pavement, but honestly, it's hard to get people's attention when there's, we can't really say that it's available or for sale or anything like that. So I'll keep working on it, but that's some input that I've received so far.
Great, thank you, Gary. All right, anyone else have anything on this topic? All right, I'll move along to new business. School building committee promotion at Willington Day. Willington Day is Saturday, May 28th. And so
yeah, so this came up last meeting. We were talking about creative ways to engage the public and just let them know where we're at, what the SBC is doing, kind of the status of the committee and the work. And so when we were meeting with the communications committee, this came up and we talked about, if there's potential that people would like to volunteer. If you wanted to do a booth, we could get a booth and have people, you could use the frequently asked questions if you wanted to and hand them out, answer questions for where the committee's at. If you're not interested in that and you just wanted to do what I'll call is a billboard, just some, an informational that we wanted to do with just where we're at. The turnaround time is pretty tight on that, but if it's something that you wanted to do, I cannot myself be there. I'm doing the road race in the morning and then I will be off. Hi, Chuck. And then, so it would take people to man a booth and answer questions. I think you'd have rotations to do that if you were interested, or we could just put the FAQ documents up or provide just some information about school building committee. Here's where you find our meeting minutes. Here's where you find our videos, the FAQ documents, just a quick informational there.
And just for anyone who's unsure, that is Memorial Day weekend, so if that makes a difference.
Sometimes I feel like we're silent in this hybrid meeting.
Right.
You can't hear us.
Erica, could we do a show of hands of people who might be interested in manning the booth that day or might be available?
Okay. Show of hands.
Anybody else?
That's one.
I can possibly, but I have a soccer tournament that I might be at, so depending on when my daughter's playing, I can try to work around that.
That's exactly where I will be afterwards as well, Justin.
Right. I cannot, so.
Well, maybe we better go with Plan B then and have some information set up.
I think without somebody manning it, that's kind of tough. Just leave something out there. We can just leave a poster board out there and maybe a copy of our FAQ sheet. So we could do that. Anyone opposed? We'll use minimal dollars in which to do that. Okay. Thank you. Moving forward, proposal for Colliers to solicit a phase 1 environmental site assessment of property. If memory serves, at our last meeting, we had discussed this. Scott, were you providing us with a proposal or were we going to be asking for a proposal?
No, I think the intent of this, we're not going to be providing a proposal. That's part of our services. I think we just want, again, based on potentially how discussions go tomorrow evening, the committee to authorize us to solicit some phase 1 environmental site assessment proposals on the behalf of the town. Again, we anticipate that this will probably be $3,000 to $4,000. Again, we as Ralph had noted, this is certainly some information we would like to get. However, we would also not like to necessarily put it out for a full public bid. We believe it's, or understand it's under the threshold of that requirement for the town, but we would solicit, we look to solicit a minimum of 3 proposals on behalf of the town. This would allow us, if we sent them directly out to some of the more reputable environmental engineers that we've worked with in the past, that we would recommend. It allows to keep anonymity of the target parcel. So again, this isn't a proposal for Colliers, but you're just authorizing us to seek the proposals. And I would say I would hold off certainly until next week till we have an understanding if the landowner is amenable to having that service performed.
So would that typically, so you're asking if we want to, so we're asking if we want to take that action before we're aware of the direction of conversation on potential land.
So I think the idea behind it is that you're prepared.
We're ready to go.
When, if it gets to a point, at some point, no matter the, Scott, no matter the property, what if it's hall school renovation? Would you still have to do a phase 1?
Yes.
So the idea
if the RFP for that would be slightly different. And again, yeah, you're gonna tailor it to the specific parcel you're reviewing. But we can put together something pretty quick on that. So, but happy to do it for the. Go ahead.
Scott, is the motion then pending approval? And we're talking about what I'll call property number 1 right now. I think right is the private piece of property. Pending approval from the landowner, the school building committee would be requesting Colliers to solicit, and we're talking about an appraisal of the property is 1, and then 2 is the solicit, the phase 1 environmental site assessment. I'm kind of blending items B and C together, or not? Or are you only C, Scott?
Well, I think we would be C. I mean, we can certainly assist with B. I don't know. I mean, typically there you might go through some local land appraisers for, that have potentially performed that function for the town, or you may have within your evaluation some appraisal companies that you've dealt with that might be able to assist in that effort.
If I'm not mistaken, so are we talking about just a phase 1 environmental site assessment?
No, we kind of skipped over the appraisal property.
So that's not in here. Oh, did I skip?
Yeah.
Look, I got check-in on accident.
So the first one definitely is that what you're saying, Scott, is not Colliers. It's just probably talking to Mike D'Amato and determining some local folks to do appraisal of the property. And the idea is that this committee is approving that we would be soliciting that cost. It doesn't mean we're approving it, the work, it just means we're gathering information of what it would cost. So next meeting, if we were ready to move, you could just approve it. You'd already have that solicited. And that is for property, I believe, again, same site number 1.
Correct. Yeah. It's just soliciting the proposals and the dollar values. But yeah, the committee is going to approve any expenditure, any contractual obligations associated with the project.
So I would say we'd probably do the same exact thing we would that Scott's saying, even though it's under the threshold, just to make sure we get 2 or 3 proposals to find out what an appraisal will cost. And I'm assuming that we would just connect with Mike D'Amato and ask him to support that process. Does that make sense?
All right, so I'm going to go backwards to item B, proposal to execute appraisal of property. I saw Ralph unmute himself. Ralph, did you want to say something, or did you just unmute?
No, well, I always have something to say. 8B, all we're giving the green light to is to solicit proposals to do an appraisal. We're not
doing an appraisal.
We're not actually doing the appraisal. So I don't like the language on the agenda. 8C, if we ultimately wind up doing a phase 1 environmental on property 1, I think we should also be doing the same thing for the whole school property. That one would be simple because of its use over the last 100 years. Let's have them both.
Yeah, if we do both, and Erica, please, correct me. I think if you do both, it's anticipated that cost could exceed $5,000, and at that point, then you'd need to put it out to bid. Is that correct?
No, so our procurement policy is 3 bids or a state approved vendor. So we could still go with 3 solicited bids.
Okay. So I can absolutely tie in the current parcel as part of that effort.
And so we'll take that in item C. Again, I apologize. So we'll go back to proposal to execute the appraisal of the property So I would say, I think Phil alluded to, if someone were to make a motion, it would probably use language that if pending
landowner approval.
Right. I mean, so Peter?
I had trouble hearing much of that, Erica. So as I understand it currently, we would be soliciting proposals for both sites for environmental phase 1 studies.
Leave that behind. Let's stick to just item B. I don't want to muddy the waters. I apologize. I went forward and skipped item B. So let's start with just item B. We're only talking about potential appraisal of the land we're calling
Site 1.
Site 1.
Okay.
Do you want to, easier if I make a motion to clarify it?
Sure.
So I'll make, typically I don't make motions, but I will for this one. I'll make a motion that school building committee solicit proposals for an appraisal of the site property that we are titling site number 1.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, Justin seconded. Discussion on the motion. Ralph?
It's a point of order. Can an ex officio member of a committee make a motion?
Make a motion, cannot vote.
Cannot vote.
You do everything but vote.
Because if it matters, I mean, I would make that motion exactly as Phil stated it.
Okay. So Phil made
If it matters.
He cannot vote, but he can make the
To
motion.
move it if you want. I was just trying to move it.
I understand.
I have a question for Scott. Scott, if we do this testing on the Hall School property, is this necessary when we go to?
Hold on.
And we're not talking about that. We're simply talking about the appraisal of the property.
Just the appraisal. Okay.
Yes, just the appraisal. Sorry.
Would the same question apply? Would that appraisal on the Hall property be necessary when we go to the state?
No.
We own the property.
Okay.
The appraisal of the site, what we're calling Site A, would be ahead of purchasing a piece of property.
Right. I'm just a little apprehensive about spending a lot of money that may not be necessary for taking it to the state. If we do decide to do the renovation on that site, would that be a better time to spend that money? My concern.
So Ann, I think, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong. When I think the intent when we go to the state is to say, here are 2 options: new site on a new building on a new site. Option 1, in no particular order here, by the way. Option 2, renovation of Hall School. The state is going to want to know what you have for land for if you're going to build a new site, and they're going to want to see the appraisals so that you're not overpaying for the property if it goes through. Scott's ready to jump in. I see it.
Yeah, correct. But the initial meeting we're trying to set up with Phil, that's much higher level than getting into this granular detail. These are things that we will need to move the project forward. But again, our initial meeting with the state is, we've got 410 students. Here's the space standard. This is how big the existing Hall Memorial School is. It's got single loaded corridors that are inefficient. This is what we think we've got to do to renovate that or build a new school. But eventually, once we pick a direction, yes, a phase 1, it will be required. And certainly you're going to want to do a phase 1 before, sooner than later on a potential purchase, because God forbid it shows something you don't want to get so far down the road planning around that site and then discover you've got an environmental concern that's a deal breaker.
The appraisal of the property. The purpose
you need two
of the
appraisals.
Right.
Yeah, you need two separate appraisals. Yep.
The purpose is to have an idea of when you're, if it gets to a point for negotiating a price, you need the appraisals.
I understand. Correct? I understand on the new property. I understand that completely, and I support the appraisal. You know, as
That's
well as the testing. Okay.
That's the only question is about the new appraisal for site A. That's
just for the new property.
Or site one.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Erica will follow along a little better so I don't get as confused where we're at. Okay, so there's a motion on the table and a second. Any further discussion? I am going to do a roll call vote in no particular order. I'm playing Hollywood Squares, and you're going to have to unmute yourselves, folks.
Aye.
Ralph?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Justin?
Yes.
Erica?
Aye.
Brianna?
Aye.
Harry?
Aye.
Erica, W abstains. All right, motion carries. All right, now we're at item C. So item C is a proposal for Colliers to solicit a phase 1 environmental site assessment of the property. And I assume when this item was drafted, we were referring to site 1, what we're calling site number 1 as well. Is that correct? But I hear Ralph.
Make the motion, Ralph.
No. Go for it.
All right, I'll make a motion to authorize Colliers to solicit proposals for a phase 1 environmental site assessment of property 1.
Is there a second? Seconded by Ann. Any discussion?
So Ralph, would you not do, sorry, Peter, I jumped your hand. Ralph, would you not add Hall School to that?
I'd like to, it's, and I would accept an amendment to that fact. I think that the Hall School property would be a slam dunk for a consultant to do a phase 1. I mean, obviously, we know its history very well.
Listening the quote, so are you saying you want to amend your motion, Ralph?
Yes.
And do you accept the motion to the amendment to his motion to include Hall School?
I would almost rather vote separately on each property.
40 a second.
So I need a, right. So Ann seconded it originally.
Oh, okay.
Robert's rules now. If you don't accept his friendly amendment.
Sorry, Ralph.
Someone else? Really working it here. Someone else
Come back to me because I don't want to change the motion as I modified it.
So at this point, do you need a different second, or how do we proceed?
Ann can withdraw her second, and I suppose you could second it.
Ann?
I would just rather vote on them separately.
So he's amended his motion. Are you withdrawing your second of it, Gary?
Gary, chime in. You can see it.
I know.
Well, if there's no somebody has to make a second to discuss it. So
I will second.
There we go. So now you can discuss it, right?
Right. So the motion is to have Colliers solicit phase 1 environmental site assessment of both sites, what we're calling site 1 and Hall School. Discussion.
With a correction, solicit proposals for
what I said?
A phase 1 environmental site assessment.
That's correct. What he said.
That is correct. Did I not say?
I don't think you said.
You did not say that.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Any discussion? Justin.
So we're getting proposals of what it would cost to do either site, not acting on anything. That's correct, right?
That is correct.
That's correct.
That's the intent. That's the intent of my motion. Yes.
I would request that those, when they provide their costs, that they break the cost down for Hall School and for property A, so it's not just blended together.
I agree.
Gary?
That makes sense.
Well, I was just going to say something, but if Ann agrees, let's go with that. I think we're just recommending they do they do or get the proposals, and then we can decide what we want to spend the money on later.
Exactly.
I think that takes care of Ann's concern.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right, so once again, I will do a roll call vote. I'm going to mix it up here, see if I can stay in order. Gary? Gary's an aye. Brianna?
Aye.
Erica? B?
Aye.
Justin?
Aye.
Here. Peter?
Yes.
You're a yes?
Yes.
Al?
Aye.
Ann?
Aye.
Erica W. abstains. All right, thank you. Future business, items for future agenda. I believe at our last meeting it was discussed that at least 2 members cannot be at our May 18th meeting, including the chair. Is there anyone else who thinks they cannot be in attendance? I want to make sure we have a quorum. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Don't have a meeting.
So we can postpone our cancel our regular meeting on the 18th and maybe potentially a meeting the following week so that we can still keep 2 in the month if the group is amenable to that. What is Wednesday? I think it's the 25th.
Or just go.
Or another.
Or cancel.
Or cancel May and we move on to June. Is there a feel from the group? I know I hear Scott saying they have a meeting with some folks tomorrow, and that feedback then I would assume will be provided at our next meeting. So how about I ask, yes, Gary?
I was just going to say, I wouldn't be able to be there on the 25th either. I think that's probably a difficult week for people. So I would just, I don't know if it makes sense to meet 2 weeks in a row. I'd just wait until June myself. However, I do hear the push from the community to get moving. And I think we're able to do that. The subcommittees can still meet in the interim. So I think we'd have plenty to do in June. I don't think that's an issue, just to address that.
Thank you for that feedback.
I would also say that I anticipate we're going to have a minimum of 1 ed spec meeting in the month of May, and maybe a week from today. I know they're working on scheduling that, so that would be, I see that as also SBC work, even though it's Board of Ed. So,
right. So I will forward on to Catherine our notation to cancel our May 18th. And unless the group finds a need to reconvene, and I'll let Catherine take that lead, we'll meet again at the first Wednesday in June. I apologize, I don't have that date in front of me.
June 1st.
Oh, there you go, June 1st.
June 1st, right. Yes.
Does anyone, and if anyone has any items for the future agenda, I suggest you forward them to the chair.
Perfect.
And I'll remind you all of Catherine's note of, just any summer meetings that you think you have conflict with, just so she can keep a running tally and we make sure we have a quorum. All right, thank you all. That brings us to item 10, present to speak. Is there anyone still hanging in there with us that would like to speak? Yes, Mr. Clark, you should have the ability to unmute yourself and identify yourself for the record.
Matthew Clark, 42 Burt Latham Road, Willington, Connecticut. So I have a question about what will be presented to the state of Connecticut. It wasn't clear to me. Will Colliers be providing its own plans for rebuilding Hall School to the state? Or will you be presenting the volunteer work developed by Mr. Toulis? And then will Colliers be presenting high-level plans for a new school to the state? And will those plans, will the plans for both options be shared with the school building committee as a whole before they're presented to the state of Connecticut? Secondly, I don't think that Willington should go and meet with the state of Connecticut until we can present ed specs. That wasn't clear to me about when that was going to happen. When are we meeting with the state of Connecticut, and when will the Board of Education have the ed specs ready, and when will they transfer them to the school building committee? And I'm commenting on Mr. Hellman's comment earlier. The reason the referendum will be 50-50 and without consensus is because our town is split 47% to 53% on this issue. So we took a survey, and that's what it turned out. With a sample of about 230 people, that's within the sampling area. We're 50-50. So I think it's appropriate that, you know, I said this is the first school building committee meeting while working outside at night in the cold. I said we should be presenting these options to the townspeople for them to decide. And I still think that's the way to go. I think it's appropriate for the decision of which path to take, build or rebuild. I don't like the word renovation, but rebuild Hall School to be made at a town meeting vote or at a referendum vote. That's my 3 or 4 comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else present to speak? All right. If the committee will allow for a moment, I just want to comment on Mr. Clark's comment. Mr. Pellman already addressed the question. The school building committee will be fully aware of the plans, and they will be the plans of the school or the projects of the school building committee that go to the state. So I think it's important to note. Is that correct, Scott? We will, you will, along with members of this committee, be speaking with the state, but they will be the work of the school building committee.
Well, yeah, and if I may, you know, at this point, the only plans that are being developed is really square footage analysis only to talk about funding in square foot and how much area the state will support. These are not fully vetted, developed plans. And again, that's why we're also waiting for the ed spec to make sure that when we start talking about square footages for reimbursement in regards to concepts, that the state understands that a renovation, most likely, of Hull Memorial School will require more square footage than a new building. So again, we're not developing final concepts, but this initial discussion with the state is based on square footage, student population, and then the extent of which they might support a project.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other business before us, I apologize, Mr. Clark, present to speak has ended. No other new business before us. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Peter is moving that. Is there a second? Everyone wants a second. Yes, there you go, Justin. This is a non-debatable matter. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Have a good night.
8:10.